friends, my name is Millie and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the best books that I read in 2024. So in 2024, in total, I read 239 books and I have managed to somehow whittle that down to a top 10, which is what I'm going to be bringing you today. But there are a lot of books that I gave 5 stars that haven't made it to this top 10 that I still absolutely loved. So you can go and check out my Goodreads, which is linked in the description down below, to see what other books I loved in 2024. But these are my top 10. So even the book that is at number 10 in this list is still like insanely good out of the books that I read in last year. So let's get right into the list. Coming in at number 10 is The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy. So Mistborn is kind of a really good place to start with Brandon Sanderson. 2024 was the year that I told myself it was going to be the year I started reading Brandon Sanderson books, and I managed to read the first Mistborn trilogy, and this was my favourite of the trilogy. I was just so blown away by his writing and it being my first experience of his writing as well that nothing could top this, not even The Well of Ascension. So Mistborn is set in a world where you have powers according to the metals that you consume, and you can normally only control the powers of one metal. So you would normally only be able to control the powers of iron or the powers of copper or whatever. But if you can control all of them, I think it is, then you are Mistborn. This is such an expansive world. It's got such deeply heavy political machinations going on, and it's a very emotional book as well. You start off following the main character Vin, and you kind of really follow her throughout her whole life in this trilogy. It's really emotional seeing her go from this 16-year-old girl or whatever it is that she starts off as to where she ends up in the last book. And honestly, I think that this is kind of holding space for all 3 books, let's be honest, because I just fell in love with the series as a whole. But this one did blow me away the most. At the start of the series, in The Final Empire, the world is lorded over by the Lord Ruler, who has ruled for over 1,000 years, and Vin and the kind of friends that she makes along the way, they kind of become part of this rebellion. They want to take down the Lord Ruler because life is just awful under him unless you're part of the nobility. And it's really a story of found family and friendship and of discovering yourself as well. As I said with Vin, the journey that she goes on in terms of character development and discovering who she is and discovering her confidence and everything like that is just amazing to see, honestly. And it really did bring me to tears at the end of the final book. But the ending of this book, I was shook. I could not. I had to go back and reread the ending multiple times. I was so desperate to read The Well of Ascension straight away afterwards. It was just blew me away. And I think what you can really tell is that despite this being the first book that I've read by Brandon Sanderson, you can really see how every single detail is chosen so carefully, and how I might get a few more books into the Cosmere and then maybe reread or look at a few things from The Final Empire and be like, oh, that's why that was there. He's very, very clever with his details and his forward planning. And that's really what I've heard about him as well, so I'm very excited to really experience that for myself as I continue on my Brandon Sanderson journey in 2025. This was just epic and action-packed, and I just could not put it down. And I'm so glad that this was where I started with Brandon Sanderson. I think this is a great place to start. I know that it can be a bit intimidating, the series as a whole, but also just The Final Empire, because it is pretty chunky. It's 600 pages, but it's so worth it. Every single page, every single word is worthwhile the space it takes up. So I'm very happy to have started my Brandon Sanderson journey in 2024. Coming in at number 9 is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. So pretty different from The Final Empire. This is an adult romance compared to an epic fantasy. And this one, I don't even know if I have the words for it. This was just incredible. So it's an adult romance, and you're following Justin and Emma, who both are kind of the one before the one. So whenever someone breaks up with them or whatever, a relationship breaks down, that person then finds their wand straight afterwards, and they both have this kind of curse, and they end up meeting each other on like a Reddit forum, I think it is, and they decide to date just for the summer to break the curse, because in theory, once they break up with each other, they'll then find the one. And Emma and her best friend are actually travelling nurses, so they decide to move to where Justin lives, like the town, for the summer, just to make things easier, and they live on this like little island. And it's very funny, but also deeply emotional. This was my first Abby Jimenez book that I'd ever read. And while this is technically like the third in a series of companion novels, I actually do think this is a great place to start, because a lot of the things that get revealed kind of towards the end of this book, I feel like, although obviously if you've read the first two books in the series, you would be able to connect the dots and sort of be like waiting for the characters to connect the dots, I was so on the edge of my seat, even though I had no idea what was going on. I was so on the edge of my seat, just being like, oh, like just gasping at this book. And I just absolutely loved it. It was so summery, so romantic, and Justin is literally the definition of if he wanted to, he would. And this book is so for the acts of service girlies. Like, there is a page in here that I just completely fell in love with. Okay, so this is the page that I just completely fell for with this book. The love stories sold us the wrong thing. The best kind of love doesn't happen on moonlit walks and romantic vacations. It happens in between the folds of everyday life. It's not grand gestures that show how you feel, it's all the little secret things you do to make her life better that you never tell her about. Taking the end piece of the bread at breakfast so she can have the last middle piece for her sandwich when you pack her lunch. Making sure her car always has gas so she never has to stop at the pump. Telling her you're not cold and to take your jacket when in fact you are very, very cold. It's watching TV on a rainy Sunday while you're doing laundry and turning her light off when she's fallen asleep reading. Sharing pizza crusts and laughing about something the kids did and taking care of each other when you're sick. It isn't glamorous, it isn't all butterflies and stars in your eyes, it's real. This is the kind of love that Forever is made of, because if it's this good when life is draining and mundane and hard, think of how wonderful it will be when love songs are playing and the moon is out. If he wanted to, he would. Like, Justin, you are a top tip book boyfriend, and I love Abby Jimenez for writing you. And Abby Jimenez, I can't wait to read more of your works. Coming in at number 8 is one that I am deeply ashamed that I did not read before 2024, and it is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. So first of all, I have to apologise to Naya once again for not reading this sooner. She's been yelling at me to read this series since like we first met, and our whole friendship has contained of her telling me to read this series, and I finally started it and it's made it into my top 10 books of the year. To no one's surprise, and especially not to Naya's surprise, I'm sure. I absolutely love this. This is technically a YA fantasy, but you could easily read it as an adult and still get a lot out of it because it is brutal. It's a martial fantasy. The world is kind of inspired by ancient Rome, I believe, and you have two main characters. So you have Leia, who witnesses her grandparents be murdered and her brother arrested, and she ends up joining the rebellion. And then you have Elias, who is like the Academy's finest soldier, but he doesn't actually want to be part of the Academy. So as part of the rebellion, Leia is tasked with infiltrating the military academy and getting close to the commander and learning the secrets of the commander. Now, Elias doesn't want to be part of the academy, doesn't believe that what this kingdom or empire, whatever it is doing, is right. And it's just such a brutal, as I said, fantasy. Like, there is so many moments where you are just like, whoa, like, did that actually just happen? And the last 100 pages of this, I could not put it down. I had like goosebumps. I was just glued to the page, and it was so addictive to read, and it's just honestly so well written. Like, Sabaa Tahir has such a talent for writing. It's absolutely incredible. The world building is just incredible. There's intense action. All the characters are really compelling, not just Leia and Elias, but all the side characters. There's a side character in Elias's best friend, Helene? I don't know how you say her name, but I feel like she's going to end up being my favourite character. And everything is just so good. Like, if you love fantasy, this is like a classic one to read. And I know I'm so late to the party, like everyone's read this book apart from me, but let's bring this back. Like, this needs to be what everyone is rereading or just reading for the first time or whatever, because it's so good and I cannot wait to read the sequel. And I just know that this series is gonna destroy me if this is how it starts off. Like, by the end of the 4th book, I'm gonna be a sobbing mess, but I'm here for that. So bring it on. Coming in at number 7 is one that I don't own a physical copy of yet, and it is The Lost Story by Meg Shaffer. And this is pitched as like adult Chronicles of Narnia, and I think that is the perfect way to describe it. So at the start of the book you meet these 2 boys, or well actually these 2 boys have gone missing, and 6 months later they come back and one of them has absolutely no memory of where they've been, what's been going on. The other one, you kind of get an inkling that he knows, but he just doesn't say anything at all, he doesn't reveal anything. And then years later, they're adults, they're grown up, they haven't spoken in quite a long time as well, I believe. So this journalist comes to find one of the boys who has become like this saviour for missing people, like he is able to track down any missing person. And she comes to him and says that she's just discovered that she had a sister, she was adopted, or the sister was adopted, and she wants his help finding her. So they go and get the other guy and head back into the woods where the 2 boys were once lost. And it is just such a gorgeous story. Like, it is so beautiful. I don't even know how else to describe it other than the word beautiful, because it just truly is. Like, it's got this really like childlike quality to the fantasy world, but in a way that you as an adult can really appreciate, which I think is just such a clever thing to do. It's really a story about dreams coming true and being open-hearted, and I would have just loved to have been able to travel to the world of Shenandoah. Like, it was just so lovely. The author has this gift of being able to like tap into your nostalgia. Like, the world is filled with unicorns and fairy princesses and magical castles and magic apples made of sunshine and dragons and shimmering seas and stairways into clouds and stuff, and it's just so good. Like, I just want to visit this world. Like, it just sounds absolutely joyful, and that is really what this book is. This is such a joyful book. The characters of this book as well just really have my whole heart. Like, Jeremy and Raph, the 2 boys who went missing and then 15 years later we meet them, they are just, I just love them. And these characters have been through some really awful, tragic things in their lives. Like, not only the 2 boys, but also Emily, the girl who's looking for her sister. They've all been through some awful things, but they are able to find the joy and the happiness in what they've got and the life they lead and stuff, and I just think it's so lovely. And I do think there is room for a second book in this world, and I'm begging for it. Like, it is a perfect standalone, and maybe a sequel would ruin the world. I don't think it would, but maybe it would. But I would love a second book set in this world. There's definitely a very open ending for a potential sequel, and I would die for a sequel and to be back in this world. Like, I am so jealous of anyone who gets to read this for the first time. This is just top tier. Coming in at number 6 is Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. This is a YA contemporary, and this was such an unexpected favourite. Like, I literally bought this and read it the next day on a train journey home, and read it literally all in one sitting. I was hooked. Like, this just got me, and I don't know if it was because I just read it all in one sitting and literally read it the day after I bought it, so I was just in that mood to read it, but it was so good. This is the perfect book for anyone who loves like 2000s rom-coms, anyone who's a hopeless romantic. This is the book. Like, and I'm really scared to read the sequel because I'm scared it's going to ruin my experience of reading this book, because it's like a second chance romance. But anyway, Better Than the Movies is a YA contemporary, and you're following Wes and Liz. Now, Wes has been irritating Liz since they were kids, but now it is their final year of high school, and he is now friends with her forever crush, Michael, and she asks him to kind of help make Michael see her as like someone to love and to fall in love with and all of that, especially because Liz really wants to go to prom with Michael, so they're scheming to be able to get Liz like the prom date of her dreams. But along the way they kind of get to know each other a lot more, and they really grow closer, and it's very Grumpy Sunshine. It's like next door neighbours kind of thing, known each other since you were kids. Like, it's so 2000s rom-coms. I don't even know how else to describe it. And I would also really highly recommend listening to music while you're reading this, like searching up on Spotify or whatever like Better Than the Movies and listening to a playlist specifically for this book because it just elevated it so much, because this book has so much to do with soundtracks and music and how the perfect music can make the moment, especially because Liz wants to, as a career, make soundtracks. So it's so good. Like, they are so made for each other, and I'm so scared to read the sequel, but I was not expecting to love this one as much as I did, but I absolutely loved it. If you love YA books, YA contemporaries, or you just love seeing people fall in love, please read Better Than the Movies. Coming in at number 5 is something very different, but also quite romantic. It is My Throat an Open Grave by Tori Bovolino. So this is a very short book, and it packs such a punch in such a short time. Just in awe of how this author did it. So My Throat an Open Grave is kind of like it's kind of horror, but it's not really scary necessarily. It's more like the idea of what could happen is the horror element, but it also has a really romantic element to it as well, which I just absolutely loved. So you're in this sort of very Christian town, and they fear the Lord of the Woods, which is like the spirit of the woods that surround their town, almost as much as they fear God. You have your main character Leah, and she is tasked with babysitting her little brother. But in this town, quite often unattended babies go missing, and in their place are left like bundles of sticks or whatever, and the person who was meant to be in charge of the baby has to go and try and get the baby back, and no one ever comes back from the woods. So one night, Leah is babysitting her little brother and he is taken. So she is forced to go into the woods and try and get him back. And she meets the Lord of the Woods and all these characters that are part of his entourage, I guess. And you really fall under the spell of this setting and of this Lord of the Woods. And it's so different to anything I've ever read. And it's so infuriatingly underhyped. Like, this should be blowing up absolutely everywhere. Like, this should be being eaten up by the BookTok girlies. Like, it is top tier. It's dark and twisted and creepy, and I just loved it. Like, it's steeped in like religious trauma and painful isolation, and you just fall right into this atmosphere of this world. Like, the atmosphere is just incredible. And considering it's such a short book, I feel like Leah, the main character, shows such amazing and complex like character growth, and I think that's so well done. It's really a story of self-discovery, but I also just love the romance, which I wasn't expecting at all, but is top tier romance, and I just need everyone to read this. Like, it is just incredible. Coming in at number 4 is Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. I read this in a reading vlog earlier this year, and you can see me crying multiple times while reading this book. The premise of this book is that at a flat viewing, a hostage situation occurs, and you follow all of these different characters that are involved, all of the hostages, the hostage taker, the police who are trying to stop the situation from unfolding, side characters. Like, you are following all these different people. And this was the first Fredrik Backman book that I've read. I have since read A Man Called Ove, but this is still my absolute favourite. There is something about this book that just spoke to me so much. Like, in fact, I was crying so much while reading it as well. It just really taps into what it means to be human and the complexities of being human and of human experiences, and whether they're sad, they're happy, anything. Like, it just taps into that so well, and I just don't even know how he manages to put it into words, like exactly what it means to be a human in this day and age. Like, it's just masterfully done, honestly. And there's a page in here that I read out in the vlog that I'll read out now that was just so wonderfully done. The truth about all this, the truth is that this was a story about many different things, but most of all about idiots. Because we're doing the best we can, we really are. We're trying to be grown up and love each other and understand how the hell you're supposed to insert USB leads. We're looking for something to cling to, something to fight for, something to look forward to. We're doing all we can to teach our children how to swim. We have all of this in common, yet most of us remain strangers. We never know what we do to each other, how your life is affected by mine. Perhaps we hurried past each other in a crowd today, and neither of us noticed, and the fibres of your coat brushed against mine for a single moment, and then we were gone. I don't know who you are, but when you get home this evening, when this day is over and the night takes us, allow yourself a deep breath, because we made it through this day as well. There'll be another one along tomorrow. Like, I was sobbing while reading that page. It's the last page of the book, and I was just sobbing. Like, I don't even know how else better to sell this book to you, other than that it made me cry multiple times, and I think any book that can do that is a book worth reading. Speaking of books that made me cry, coming in at number 3 is The 10,000 Doors of January by Alix E. Harrow. So I didn't actually physically shed a tear while reading this book, but that was only because I was at work and had to go back to work after being on my break while reading the last 50 pages of this. And if I wasn't at work, I would have been sobbing my eyes out while reading this. So this is a fantasy story that is basically following a young girl called January, whose father is an explorer. And so often she is left with her ward, her guardian, Mr. Locke. One day, he and January are visiting this town and she wanders off, and in the middle of this field she finds a door that obviously shouldn't be there. And she steps through the door and she immediately knows she's not in the same world. She's standing on a cliff top, there's seas crashing around her, etc. She comes back and doesn't tell Miss Locke about it, but she goes back the next day and the door is destroyed. And she doesn't find another door for years and years until after her father goes missing, is presumed dead, and she finds this book hidden in a chest of drawers in her room, which is called The 10,000 Doors of January. And it is the story of these two people falling in love who are from different worlds, and they fall in love across these doors. And you kind of come to understand the relation that these two people have to January, and so does she, and then she decides to go on this quest to find this other world, to find another door that will lead her there. It is just so beautiful. It just completely blew me away. I get goosebumps thinking about this book. I've got goosebumps right now thinking about it. It is just amazing. It's really an ode to storytelling and the love of stories. I absolutely adored our main character January. She 100% owns a piece of my heart now, as does this whole book in general. And it's really a story about how doors not only open up to new worlds and stuff, but also allow change. And the villains of this story don't want the world to change. They don't want the change and development that having these doors open brings. And so it's really a story of fighting for that, fighting for new experiences, and fighting for allowing the world to change and allowing people to grow and the world to grow and develop in a good way and not just be stuck in dreary, dreadful times, because this is set in the 1910s, 1920s. So obviously it's at quite a tumultuous time in history. So you have that kind of message going on as well, which I think is so beautifully put in. And there is a quote that I've got written down here, and I can't find what page it's on, but I have it written here, which is, "Worlds were never meant to be prisons, locked and suffocating and safe. Worlds were supposed to be great rambling houses with all the windows thrown open and the wind and summer rain rushing through them, with magic passages in their closets and secret treasure chests in their attics. I was so very tired of locked doors." Just read this book. It is Alix E. Harrow's debut, and for this to be a debut is insane. I could only dream of writing something as incredible as this in the 10th book I would publish, let alone it being the very first book that I would ever publish. So the fact that it's a debut as well is just insane to me, but it's just amazing. This just completely blew me away, completely stole my heart out of my chest. I loved it. Coming in at number 2 is a book I've been waiting for over 10 years. It is When the World Tips Over by Jandy Nelson, and I have literally been waiting for a new Jandy Nelson book since the last book she wrote was published, which was 10, 12, whatever years ago, and we finally got a new one in 2024, and I was lucky enough to win an ARC of this at Bookfest, and let me tell you that I was on the verge of tears. Well, actually, I didn't even win it. I went with Naya and Naya's sister, and Naya's sister won this for me because I didn't win it the first time. And when I tell you that I saw that book in her hands, I was on the verge of tears because I could not believe I was going to get to read it early, and let alone have a proof copy of a Jandy Nelson book. I'm so grateful to Naya's sister for winning that for me. But anyway, When the World Tips Over is a YA contemporary that is following this family, and it's told with Jandy Nelson's signature poetic flowery style that I just love. It's got a real touch of magical realism to it, which I think is really cleverly done. It's set in Paradise Springs, Northern California, following 3 siblings, the 4 siblings, Winton, Miles and Dizzy. You also have their mum involved in it, but you also have these generations stretching back to their grandparents, great-grandparents, all of that and learning the story of their family. And then you also have the girl with rainbow hair who comes along and kind of changes all of their lives. Years ago, the father of these siblings disappeared, sort of cracking their lives in half, and this girl comes along to kind of heal all of them. And there's also like one character can talk to dogs, one character can like cook these amazing meals. Like, it's just, I don't even know how to explain it. It's got quite slow pacing, but that allows you to devour every single word, and every single word is so carefully chosen to make this beautiful kind of lyrical story that just sweeps you off your feet and sweeps you along with these characters. You're learning about their ancestors, which is just incredible, and then you're learning about them in the present day and how their ancestors' decisions have affected everyone's lives in the present day. And I think that's such a beautiful thing to include in a book. Like, I don't think I've ever read anything quite like this, honestly. And it's a pretty thick book for a YA contemporary, but honestly I wish it had been longer. I would have read 1,000 pages of this book, and I am really scared that we're gonna have to wait another 10 years for another Jandy Nelson book, begging the publishing world to please not let that happen. Like, I understand why, because it's so cleverly done, and how she weaves a story together obviously must take time, but I need more than just 3 Jandy Nelson books in my life. I'm just gonna have to include this in like my rereads of her books that I do every couple of years, because I love her. I love Jandy Nelson so much, and I feel like she's so underhyped. Maybe it's only like because she hasn't released a new book in 10 years, but I feel like she's dangerously underhyped. Like, she is incredible. Anyway, back to When the World Tips Over. The title of this book is included in a sentence that is, "When the world tips over, joy spills out with all the sorrow." And I think that's such a beautiful way of summing up this book. It's filled with joy and laughter and love, but also sorrow and heartbreak and tragedy, and the way it's all put together is just like nothing I've ever read. I love this. A world where I don't give a Jandy Nelson book 5 stars is not a world I want to live in. So thank God this was 5 stars and has ended up at number 2 in my top 10 books of 2024. So you might be wondering, what book is going to top those last 10, but especially those last 2? Considering how much I was gushing about those last 2, it's not going to be a surprise to anybody that it is Funny Story by Emily Henry. I love Emily Henry. If you don't know that about me, you must be new here, because I adore Emily Henry with my whole entire heart. And I was actually lucky enough to read this as a proof, but I obviously then bought the Waterstones exclusive edition. This is an adult romance, but her books have so much nuance to them that I don't know if they can really be called adult romances anymore. I feel like they are just adult literary fiction with a romantic element to them, because this book is, the romance is obviously a massive part of it, but I feel like an even bigger part of this book is the main character's journey and self-discovery and learning how to love herself outside of a relationship. The main character, Daphne, is cheated on by her fiance Peter, and Peter breaks up with her to be with his best friend Petra. Now, Daphne is then kicked out of her house and she has to go and basically live with Petra's ex-boyfriend, who was broken up with as well and cheated on as well, Miles. Let me tell you, they are made for each other, genuinely made for each other. But you know what else is made for each other? Me and Emily Henry's books. Because let me tell you, every single Emily Henry book that I've read feels like it was like pulled from my brain to be the exact book that I need to read that year or in that moment or whatever. Like, I read Happy Place at exactly the right time in my life, and now I've read this at exactly the right time in my life. I read Beach Read at exactly the right time. Like, they just feel so like they were written for me. And I'm sure they weren't. I'm sure she has no idea who I am, but it does feel like she is in my brain, which is a great feeling to have, honestly, because when you find that author who feels like they are peering into your brain to see what you want to read, like, that's such a magical thing, a magical feeling as well. It's just amazing. This is such a witty and sarcastic book. There's great banter between all of the characters, but especially Miles and Daphne. I thought that the pacing was absolutely perfect. I was really engaged throughout and I just didn't want this book to end. Obviously both Daphne and Miles are dealing with heartbreak and trauma, and I really loved seeing both of their journeys of self-development, but obviously especially Daphne's, seeing how she comes to like learn how to stand on her own 2 feet. I think that is a really special thing to include in any book really, but especially in the romance category. I think it's a really special thing to write about. In this, Daphne is having to sort of learn how to accept that like other people's actions are not a result of her not being good enough. And Emily Henry, I'm going to need you to pay for my therapy bills. Like, it is just such a heartfelt story, and while it's called Funny Story, like, and it is, you know, there are humorous moments to it, it is a really emotional time, but I just think Emily Henry balances emotion with humour so well, and in such a clever way that you still have a great time even while you're reading about these, you know, painful experiences that the characters are going through. And also Miles, the love interest, is so Nick Miller coded. Like, if you've seen New Girl, he is Nick Miller. You know the scene in New Girl, like the first kiss scene that is like one of the best kiss scenes in all of viewing history. This is just as good as that. He is Nick Miller, and I like, where do you find one of those in real life? I don't understand. But I loved him, and I love Daphne, and I love them together, and I love Emily Henry, and I will read literally anything she writes. I would read her shopping lists, I would read just anything, one-word notes, anything. Like, I'm so excited for this. Emily Henry has been my top book of the year for I think 3 years running now. Happy Place was my favourite of 2023, and I'm pretty sure that Beach Read was my favourite of 2022, or at least of whatever year I read it. So I love her. I cannot wait for her next book to probably be my top read of 2025. Who knows? We'll see. But there's no topping her at this point for me. I just love Emily Henry. So those were my top 10 books that I read in 2024. I feel like I had such a good reading year in 2024. I had a lot of 5-star reads. I found a lot of favourites. I tried a lot of new authors out that have become my favourites, like Brandon Sanderson and Lynn Painter, and old favourites have come back like Jandy Nelson, and it's just been such a good reading year, and I'm so excited to see what 2025 is going to bring, what books are going to be in my top 10 video at the end of 2025. But please let me know what your favourite book of 2024 was, or your top 10 or top 5, whatever. Let me know what your favourites were in the comments below, and if you've read any of my favourites as well, what you thought of them. If you'd like to follow me on my Goodreads or my Bookstagram, the links will be down in the description below. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye!